So we had a huge move, and the dollar was getting killed. The dollar was falling as bond yields were rising. And the driving factor were these trade deficits that people were worried about. They were worried about the trade deficit in 1985, even though they're not worried about it now. And it's much bigger as a percentage of GDP now than it was then. At least back then, people were worried. And by 1987, they were really worried. And that is really what the catalyst was for the 1987 stock market crash, when the Dow dropped 500 points in one day, which, back then was a big deal. I mean, today we were down 500 and you don't even know. 500 in 1987 was like 20% of the value of the Dow, because the Dow was, 2000 and something back then. But the trade deficit was so problematic. The markets were so worried about the trade deficit and the rising trade deficit that the bond market was tanking, the dollar was tanking, and then the stock market crashed. And my point really is that the markets have been asleep at the switch. So have the bond vigilantes, right? They've been completely MIA. Well, they're coming back, right? That's what's happening. Well, maybe they're going to start to worry about the trade deficits again and the budget deficits, right? The way they were in the past. And if that is the case, then that means we're going to get big problems. We had the stock market bubble in the 1990s and the tech bubble, and that popped. And then we had the housing bubble in the aughts, right? And that popped in 2008. We had the financial crisis. Well, the bubble we've got now is much bigger than both those bubbles combined. We got a bubble in stocks and a bubble in real estate, but we also have a bubble in bonds, even though the air is coming out of it. It's still there. We got a bubble in the dollar for sure. We got a huge bubble in crypto. I mentioned that Bitcoin alone already has a bigger market cap than all the .coms that went bankrupt. All 400 .coms that were publicly traded that went bankrupt at their peaks weren't even worth as much as Bitcoin. Forgetting about all the altcoins, Ether, the other ones, all the stocks, MicroStrategy. 2 or 3 more companies have come out in the last week, and they've announced that they bought Bitcoin. They added Bitcoin to their balance sheet. Now, these companies all, in one way or another are related to crypto and stuff like that. So it's not, they're in the industries, but they're still taking cash and buying Bitcoin, and, the market is rewarding them. But, how many companies can do the same thing that MicroStrategy is doing? Because now they're getting a lot of competition in the we issue debt and buy Bitcoin business, right? That's their business. They're not a software company. They're in the business of buying Bitcoin and paying for it by issuing stock and debt. By the way, MicroStrategy stock ain't looking so good right now. It's now almost down about 40% from its peak, a couple of weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago. And the last time they announced a buy of Bitcoin, and they announce it every Monday, so I'm sure we'll get another buy on Monday. But this Monday, they announced a buy, and their average price was like 106,000 for the Bitcoin. That was their highest print. And they only bought about another $500 million, which is still a lot to pay for nothing. But as I'm doing this podcast now, Bitcoin is barely hanging on to 94,400. So MicroStrategy is way off on that buy, but the technicals are really starting to break down. As a joke, because the thing that's been powering Bitcoin is the fact that they're going to be a Bitcoin reserve. Well, there's going to be no reserve, right? There's been no talk about that. I mean, it's not going to happen. But they got to keep the potential out there. So there'll be articles about it, but Trump has much bigger fish to fry. He's not going to waste any political capital trying to get this Bitcoin reserve done. So it ain't going to happen. And so at some point, the market's going to crash, because that's basically what's holding it up, is the fact that they think the government's going to come in with the big government bailout. But I joked and I said, look, if the U.S. government really wants to own 5-10% of a cryptocurrency, why buy one? Just start your own. The U.S. government can come out with its own crypto. Yeah, it can make a limit, hard cap at 21 million, no problem. Right? Just come up with your own and endorse it. And so I floated the idea, and I said, how about USA coin? And I had Grok, come up with a coin with a picture of Trump and Elon Musk on a gold coin that looks like the way they represent Bitcoin. And I said, hey, here's how it could look, right? This is how we could represent it. And let's call it USA coin. And, save the taxpayers some money. Instead of paying $100,000 for a Bitcoin, just, these could come out for pennies, whatever, just like Bitcoin did. And so instead of making the Bitcoin hodlers rich, just, save the taxpayers the money and just buy this new coin. What the hell difference would it make? I mean, because they could still use it. They could still dominate that coin. And in fact, if the U.S. government came out and said, hey, this is the coin that we like, and hey, we can't print it, it's hard capped at 21 million, we can make it legal tender. We could actually put it on a blockchain and make it capable of functioning, much better than Bitcoin, make it faster, make it cheaper, make it actually work as a currency. Yeah, why the hell not? I mean, not like I really want them to do it, but if they wanted to do it, I mean, sure. So I put it out as a joke. The next thing I know, some guy actually launches one of these coins. It did like $10 million of trading in the first day. And as soon as I saw it, I had to go on and post, hey, don't buy this thing. I joked about it. Some of these Bitcoin guys don't understand sarcasm, or they just thought that they could take advantage of it and screw some people out of the money, which is what happens. But I've heard now there's another one coming out. There's a ICO. I don't know, but stay away from this. I mean, I try to back away from it or tell people not to buy it, that I wasn't serious. I said something like, Bitcoin is for losers, USA coin is for winners, hold it to the moon, whatever. Just all, the crypto nonsense. But they went out and created it. But the point I was making before I went off on that tangent is Bitcoin is a massive bubble too, right? And there are distortions. I mean, think about all of the capital that has been wasted on Bitcoin and blockchain related companies, right? That don't produce any products that we need, that don't generate any profits. They just generate returns for the shareholders because the price goes up because some idiot is willing to buy their stock. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is building real things, right? Making real stuff. That's one of the reasons our trade deficit is going up, is because instead of producing real goods, we're creating cryptocurrencies. And we're trying to figure out ways to gamble with cryptocurrencies while the world is making all the stuff that we actually need. And while we're talking about and we're encouraging our citizens to load up on Bitcoin, the rest of the world, the Chinese, they're buying gold, right? And so this is part of this huge bubble, this Bitcoin bubble, and the stock market bubble, and the housing bubble, and the bond bubble. It is much bigger than what we had in the 90s and the 2000s. And because it's bigger, it's doing more damage to the economy. There are more mistakes. There are more malinvestments that need to be worked out now than there were back then. And making it even worse, all of this is happening at a time where the underlying structure of the economy that this bubble is built on top of is fundamentally weaker. We're in worse shape economically than we were in the 90s or the 2000s. We have a lot more debt now than we did then, right? So when this everything bubble pops, and it has to pop, the consequences are far more catastrophic than what we had in 2001 or 2008.